This is Real Estate Real Talk, a weekly podcast about real estate industry news that actually matters, hosted by some of the industry's leading agents. Here are this week's hosts.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Real Talk podcast. Today we're talking with Leigh Brown, CRS, instructor, educator, and past president of RRC. We get to talk to Leigh today about data centers and real estate, a great timely topic, and I can't wait to dive in. Leigh, welcome. Will you please introduce yourself and give us some background on your career as a real estate agent?
Well, there is no short and easy introduction because I've lived a lot of life in my years, but I have been a full-time residential realtor for 26 years. I came to real estate after a stint working on Wall Street, and I absolutely hated living in New York, and I hated dealing with people and their money. And then I worked for a short time as a salesman for Husqvarna, which is premium weed trimmers, lawnmowers, and chainsaws. And I did not like the corporate structure. And because my dad had gotten into real estate in 1978, I'd grown up around the business, going to open houses and doing flyers and all the things that realtor kids do. So when I got frustrated, my dad said, just come home and get in the business with me. And so I moved back to my home county and got into the business full time in 2000. And from there, it turned into I worked on his team. We became partners. And then as he started to scale back, I started to really scale up, built my own team. We had our own RE/MAX franchise for 20 years. My dad is now fully retired. I went independent right before the COVID market hit. And it's been the best career I could have ever imagined. And along the way, of course, I started in the business as a buyer's agent and assistant. I was also single. So in the business, I've gone from young and single to an empty nester. My husband and I have been married for 23 years, and we have 2 grown kids. Well, when I first got into real estate, the very first thing my dad did within a month was send me to Howard Brenton to Star Power University. And for those that don't know, Howard Brenton was one of the starters of CRS, one of our very first instructors. And his whole program was built on learning from the people at the top of their game, the top producers. So I started in the business learning from the people doing 300, 400, or 500 transactions. I did not ever think about this as a business of part-time or halfway. It was always to the moon. And then my dad also told me I needed to be ready to get my CRS. And so I got my CRS designation in 2003 in the old PRO Act program, which I really wish they'd bring back. And that was 6 days taking nothing but CRS classes to get my designation crushed out. And I was fortunate because one of my good friends in real estate here in my home market is Tim Brown. And Tim and I did that together. And I always tell people that the power of these classes is not just in the content, it's in the people you spend time with. So he and I went to Vegas. We built all these relationships with agents from around the country and also with each other that have endured to this day. I still talk to the people that were in my original PRO Act class. And I looked at what education did for my business as a way to really not make as many mistakes as other agents were making. I didn't have the mistakes that I hadn't heard about. I heard about them. People told me, don't do this, do this. And so my learning curve wasn't low and slow. It was a fast hockey stick, really, and drove me to the top levels of production here in Charlotte. But of course, you can get bored in real estate. It's something we don't talk about nearly enough, is that when you do have the muscle memory and you've sold a lot of houses, it can get boring because I know before I go to a house what the seller's objections will be. I know what a buyer's objections will be. And absolutely, I can professionally work with them through that. But the thrill can really come down a lot. So to replace that thrill, I got involved in becoming an educator. So I became an educator and a speaker starting in 2009 to 11. And that's been a huge part of my life since then because I learned from people so early on through the CRS network, through the Star Power network, who willingly shared everything. And as was pointed out to me by one of our departed CRS instructors, Alan Haynes from Virginia, Alan was fantastic. And he reminded me that because I had been given so much so freely, I had an obligation to give back. And Alan just encouraged me to give back before I thought I had anything to give. And we all need that person in our life that sees us as more than we see ourselves. And I miss him a lot. I wish he was still around to be a part of, well, my life and everybody else that he touched so willingly. And I look at the CRS network now, of course, it's the RRC and the CRS. I've had people ask me for years, why do you get referrals out of this business? Why do you have things that happen to you? And I tell them it's because I listened to Alan and I gave back, and not just from a stage, but from a volunteer standpoint. The first place I volunteered in realtor world was in the CRS world on the North Carolina level, where I encountered people who didn't want me volunteering, and I had to learn through that process that not everybody wants you in leadership, but if you want to do it, you better find a way. So I got involved nationally. That led me in a path to becoming the national president of CRS in 2017. And I always remind people I was the last president of CRS because it became the RRC in 2018 with dearly departed Gary Williams. And that was, I can't believe, almost a decade ago, but it was a wonderful opportunity to learn from other people and support the network that had supported me.
Thank you, Leigh. I appreciate you sharing more about why education is so important. And of course, it shows why it's also important to keep up with things that are changing in real estate, which is why we're here today to tackle the subject of data centers. So you recently just hosted a webinar with us before the bulldozers, the question every realtor should be asking about data centers. So if you could rephrase again, what exactly is a data center and why is it becoming an issue?
Data centers are what make all of these things operate. And so if you start thinking about the bandwidth of your computers and how you talk to people on FaceTime, and what COVID required us to do was put everything on Zoom and on video, add all of that to the new world where AI is involved in everything. In fact, it's in your email. You didn't even ask for it to be there, but it's everywhere. All of those technology tools have to operate on a platform somewhere, and the data centers are where the giant server farms are located. We used to call them server farms. Now they call them data centers, I guess, because server farm didn't really make sense because the data centers are using the arable land where farms used to be. But what a data center is a place to power technology, what it boils down to. So one data center can house thousands and hundreds of thousands of servers, which make all of these things run. It's become a huge issue when it comes to land use and property rights, and realtors have to be paying attention to these issues because we're going to be asked questions by landowners and by land purchasers about these data centers and what they mean to a community. So on the webinar, we discussed that the places realtors need to be focused are what is the zoning necessary for a data center? Well, that's industrial zoning. So it's highly recommended that any realtor call their local planning department and get a map of the industrial zoned parcels, because then you know where they can go without a public vote. They can also go in other places, but those might require hearings and votes. And I think it's wildly important that we're aware of where they can land before anybody's paying attention. And again, that's a before the bulldozers moment, because if you see the dirt moving, it's too late. Everything's in place. The other thing realtors need to be aware of is that these we don't know if they will, but they could have an impact on property value in the future. And I say that because we all know in real estate, on the residential side, if a house backs up to a 4-lane highway, it's going to sell at a discount relative to a house that does not back up to a 4-lane highway. Is what it is. You also find that houses that back up to high-tension power lines will sell for less relative to market because of where they sit. They still sell, but they experience discounts. Caveat being, during COVID, it seemed like nothing had a discount. That was a high watermark in the market, which covered up a lot of question marks buyers may have had. Now that the markets are settling back down, those same houses that have something in their proximity are experiencing a different market than the neighbors that don't have any of that. And realtors have to be aware not to cause fear and to tell people that the sky is falling, but because we know things. And we got to say, yeah, here it is. It might impact your value, but it might not, but you should be aware of it. That's what disclosure looks like. It's not to cause fear. It is to fully inform and provide informed consent. And the reason that data centers can impact value is because they do generate a hum 24 hours a day as the building is cooling all of those servers. In addition to the hum, and there's plenty of videos out there documenting this, and I highly recommend everybody go to TikTok and look for them so you can see what people are posting. There's also backup diesel generators. In the event that the grid is overtaxed, the diesel generators can kick up and then you get a boom. What does that mean? Well, to the homeowner, they're probably going to get used to it. Like highway noise, it becomes white noise. But the buyer who walks in to look at it says, I don't know about this. And so you have to tell your sellers, it could be a conversation with the buyer. It might not be, but we don't know. We don't know what the downstream value effect will be. Do I believe there will be one? Yes. How much? No idea. You also want to consider the fact that these are cooled by water. And there's two different kinds of data center constructions. One has closed loop, which uses much less water than one that is not closed loop, which competes with residential and commercial people for potable water. So how do you find out which kind you have? You have to read the contract. You have to look at what's been approved by your planning and zoning and by your city and county. And that's what I wanted realtors to be aware of, is that there are certain things that we can ask, that we can learn, and that we can then share. And if a data center is coming, it's absolutely reasonable for you to be the one that goes to the meeting and says, I see that it's coming. As a town and city, we should be requiring this to be closed loop so that there's less impact on the water. We should be the ones asking to make sure that they're going to absorb their own utility cost and not cause an increase to homeowners, which is one of my primary concerns. We're already in a market where our residential homeowners are experiencing increased property taxes and insurance is through the roof. If their utilities triple at the same time, we are going to have people that are priced out of the American dream, and it is realtors who are the ones most equipped to speak up about that. So I was really grateful that we had a huge turnout for that webinar, and I hope that everybody who's got the bundle of educational webinars will go back and check it out. We are including the chat thread from that webinar because that chat was wide open. People were just all over the place. It was fantastic because so many of our CRS members were sharing resources and informational things and sharing their viewpoints. It was the very picture of why realtors need to be at the front of every national issue, because nobody in that chat was in full agreement with one another. There were pro-data center, anti-data center, question marks in the middle, and it was a very vibrant conversation. And I can't recommend enough to anybody who's listening to this or watching this, you've got to pay attention to some of these webinars, because even if the presenter is not your cup of tea, the chat may have every bit of information that you need to conduct a successful business.
On that webinar, there were for sure a lot of opinions and insights from everyone in different markets. So was there anything that stood out to you from that chat about any attendees or discussions about their markets?
Well, we had a lot of people in the chat with firsthand experience who were able to say, yes, a lot of the things that you have heard in the mainstream conversation are true. There were other people that are right in the front edge of this. They've heard about a data center coming. They were there to learn and to gather. And then we did have one person in the chat who was so vehemently in favor of data centers. And the reminder to all of us is that when you do have a strong opinion, the world doesn't have to cave to your strong opinion. You're better off defending it instead of throwing accusations into a pretty vibrant conversation of professionals, which I love that CRS professionals generally know how to scale their emotions back. And I think that one person may have damaged their professional reputation because they were just so inflammatory, and it's not necessary. And when we talk about big issues, our job is actually to pull back. If you start feeling defensive, get more curious, because your defensive mechanism might be causing you to miss a really interesting viewpoint. And that chat was so full of very good, smart people sharing what they have seen, what they have learned. And I believe it was Natalie, and I can't remember where she's from. She was sharing some excellent follows, the people who are doing a lot of deep dives on this. She was providing outside resources, and I personally was just so grateful for that. So it's a reminder to all of us that real estate can get really heated, especially when the world wants to tell us what's going to happen with land and houses and such. But we're the ones that are in the trenches, so we have an obligation to do the research, learn some things, and then, after you arrive at a viewpoint, speak up about it.
It's great to meet together and learn other viewpoints and see what other people have experienced, and also share what everyone's clients' viewpoints have been. So, Leigh, how do you think a realtor can navigate different client viewpoints from a topic like this? Some maybe really are against the data centers for the noise and the environmental impact, and others might see this as good for economic growth.
Well, I said it yesterday when I kicked off that webinar, and I'll say it again. I say it all the time. Howard Brinton led every conference and every educational event with get out of judgment and into curiosity. So if you're the realtor who believes one thing about data centers and your clients have expressed something different, go to curiosity. It is, tell me more about why you believe that way. Where did you get your information? Help me to understand. If we take that help me to understand viewpoint, we will allow them to share what they know and then figure out if they are being driven by logic or emotion. Because real estate gets so wildly driven by emotion so quickly, and we feed into that because realtors are people pleasers and we're very opinionated about real estate. But if you will slow it down and get into curiosity, they might just open your mind to a different angle that you had not yet considered. And that's a good thing. And there's nothing wrong with that because then you have the chance to say, I hear what you're saying. However, I would consider X, Y, and Z. You could share your viewpoints again without emotion so that everybody can learn from each other. But at a certain point, you might have to say, you know what? I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on this particular topic. And let's talk about something different. A grown-up can do that. If you're the person who says, I am not working with these people because they don't agree, you're the one that needs to dial it back. And I say this as somebody who is very political. I'm very involved in politics in my county and in my state. I've run for office. I have lots of principled opinions, but I do not take any of them into an inflammatory place. It's just not worth it. And as a result, my client base is made up of people who disagree with me wildly. One of my agents doesn't agree with me on 90% of things, and she is one of my favorite people in the world. I would never trade her out because of an opinion. And so as realtors, we have to ask ourselves, if you're trading the human for an opinion, you might have made the trade that wasn't worth it.
So, based on your own experiences, how would you navigate that conversation with your own clients in your own market? For example, if there's a data center in your area.
Same way that I suggest everybody else do it, just be in curiosity. I'll also say that if you're like me, and I am not in favor of a lot of data centers, I think there's probably a need for some. Are we being overwrought with them? Are they being overbuilt? I think so. That's my opinion. And so when I'm having a conversation with a landowner, part of my job is to present to them options. I want to be able to talk about conservation easements. I find it to be a very interesting topic. In fact, I was talking with a family about it this past week. They don't like conservation easements because they don't want their children bound by what their decisions were. I value that. That's the number one reason people don't go down that road. So we're just talking about the pros and cons of different things. At the core of it, though, it's not my land and it's not my decision. My job is to help make sure they understand pros and cons on all sides of every article, and part of that is me being the best educated professional I can be. Now, most realtors aren't going to deal with landowners because residential real estate and land are two different specialties, and I would implore a residential realtor to not mess with land unless you have a mentor or an educational resource so that you are understanding that it is a different real estate product, same way that commercial is wildly different than residential. That being said, there is a hand in glove because what happens on the land side will be experienced by the residential side, whether it's a piece of land that's turned into a subdivision, a data center, a solar farm, or it's kept in timber contract, and then there's a neighborhood nearby. Those houses will be impacted by the decisions made on this land. If that new subdivision built is a higher price point, could bring their prices up. If it is multifamily hedge fund apartments, it could bring their prices down. If it's kept in ag or timber, that generally improves prices. If it's turned into a data center, again, we don't know, probably going to do a little downward pressure. So the land does have a direct impact on the residential. You have to be the one who's the most educated in the market so that people know you're not out here just gunning for a house, just chasing a commission. You're looking at your community from a holistic standpoint. And frankly, the whole data center conversation is a chance for many good realtors to rebrand themselves as thought leaders in their community. What a wonderful opportunity for you to be the one. Well, like Margie Medlin in Georgia. Margie messaged me yesterday after our webinar. She did what I suggested because she's an implementer. She went to her social media and said, I was just on an educational webinar about data centers and paying attention to what it could mean to my clients. She didn't take a standpoint either way. And the comments started flowing in. Then she gets an invitation to the city council meeting where they're having a conversation about data centers. That's where Margie's going to be able to go in there and say, here's the questions we have from the real estate sector. It, again, doesn't mean she's taken a stance one way or the other, but she is now a respected resource, and what a wonderful way for her to increase her brand in a way that many realtors are frankly scared to do because so many realtors are scared of taking a stance on things. Y'all, sometimes the stance that you take is just you being available as a resource.
So, what's a good first step for real estate professionals to get more involved and informed with their local communities?
The first place I think every realtor should be involved is planning and zoning, whether it's at the county level, the municipal level. It is the most important body that impacts your day-to-day real estate business. And realtors bring such an interesting perspective to those meetings because we know in working with a home buyer, they are looking at not just the house, but the community. At the DOT, are they adding a turn lane out here? Do we need a stoplight? They're looking at water and sewer. Are we well and septic? Are we county water and sewer? Are we on city treated from a plant? What are the options? What am I facing here? And then they look at the schools, what's happening with the schools. We have public schools, we have school choice and vouchers, we have charter schools, and we have church affiliated religious schools. We got all these options out there, and our buyers are looking at all of those factors. Then they ask about the commercial environment. How close is the nearest grocery store? Is there going to be a Dollar General over here? They're paying attention to what's coming and going. So when a realtor who is active in the business goes to a planning and zoning meeting, you're in there with developers who have one viewpoint. You're in there with lawyers who have their viewpoint. You're in there with a nosy neighbor who just wants to be in the middle of things. Realtors come in and we've got this multifaceted viewpoint. It is so valuable. And even if you're not willing to serve because you just don't feel like you're equipped for that, you can go. You can sit in the gallery, gather the information, and raise your hand and say, I have a question about that. I'm a local realtor, XYZ. You have so much power and you're just not using it. And frankly, in some of your communities, these meetings are streamed live on YouTube. Now, you don't have the power on YouTube that you have being in the room. But if you're the person who is wildly nervous about being involved, you could watch a few meetings on YouTube, build up some knowledge and some comfort, and then go to the meeting in person. The reality of local politics is that you might have a planning and zoning board of 7, and there's 3 people in the audience for that meeting, and they're talking about something that's going to impact your clients right now because you've got a house backing up to this 2-lane road that they plan to put double lines on and add a turn lane. Well, that's going to impact your homeowner, so you have questions. Who did the traffic study? Who's paying for this? Are they going to install any kind of noise or landscape buffer? Those are very reasonable questions, and your homeowners won't do it. So you do it on their behalf because when they hired you, you became a fiduciary. And being a fiduciary is a big deal. It says you're putting somebody else's best interest before your own. Legally, your state gave you that opportunity. So when you go and you raise your hand and ask those questions, then you've done your fiduciary job at an entirely different level. Well, for some of y'all, you'll take that and say, I'd like to be on the planning and zoning board. All over the country, there are openings on these boards because a lot of citizens just don't want to fool with it. They don't want to fight. They don't have the time, they don't have the expertise, and they don't have the willingness. Well, if you're a realtor, why don't you think about this as another way to build your business? Not like you're going to go in there tossing cards out saying, hey, who do you know that needs to buy or sell? But that you go in there and say, I would like to be known as a voice of real estate in my community. Now, you won't be the only voice because there's other realtors that are engaged, but it's a vanishing few. You could be in that elite group. So you start going, you call the mayor or the county commission chair and ask for an appointment. You'll often get one. And then you've learned things. Now, the way that you build your business after learning is not to get on social media and say, I changed everything in our county for the better. I am the best. That's pretty aggressively gross. But you could say, hey, friends, as a local realtor, I'm also on the planning and zoning board. You're welcome to our meetings on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Please come join us. Please pull the agenda. Please pay attention to your community. What an amazing message that would be to be the realtor who says, hey, citizens, if you're following me, you should come. You should come bring your voice and be heard. That is power when it comes to marketing because now you're known as a resource. Who do you think they're going to call when it comes to real estate? They're going to call their brother-in-law's new wife who just got her license, or are they going to call you who's been over here saying, hey, I'm on planning and zoning while I sell houses too. Y'all are invited. It's an entirely different level of expertise. Now, in addition to that, there's other opportunities. You may have a water and sewer authority in your county. Ask for an appointment to that. Parks and Rec. If you're a runner like me, you know how important the green spaces are. You're a pickleballer. Maybe you want to be involved in those decisions, which also impact real estate. There are opportunities all over the place, and what it's going to cost you is time. It's also going to put you maybe in the crosshairs when a decision happens that the public's not happy with. Well, if you're the person who's chosen not to be inflammatory but has chosen to be a resource, if people come at you, you're going to go right into curiosity mode and say, tell me why you called. I'd like to hear your viewpoint. I'd like to hear why you think that way. And it will diffuse almost every angry person when you get out of defensive mode and into curiosity mode. But we could absolutely fix so much of what's gone wrong in the country right now if more realtors just stood up and said, I'm here to be the reasonable one.
Yes, exactly. It's really important for realtors to be informed on what's going on in their communities because clients buying or selling in that location will have questions regarding their transaction and how it's going to affect any sales as well. So, in the webinar, you shared a planning and zoning checklist. Can you share what that checklist is and why it's so important, how that will help navigate conversations with future clients?
Absolutely. And if you go back and watch that webinar, the QR code is at the end where that is available to CRS members who are watching this. And if you're not a member of the Residential Real Estate Council, you can join. It's not crazy expensive. It's a great investment in your business. That checklist is the things everybody should know. So I want everybody to start off by learning who's on the Planning and Zoning Board. Find out their names and phone numbers so that you can contact them and say, hey, I'm a local realtor and I just want to find out how I can get information about the meetings. They're public servants. They are appointed to those seats. They'll return your phone calls. It's also important for you to know when the meetings happen so you can pull the agenda and pull the minutes if you can't go. When it comes to planning and zoning, if you're watching for data centers or other use changes that you're not thrilled about, you can also call the planning department and ask for a map of industrial zoned sites. They know which parcels have industrial zoning because those purchasers are going to have to come to planning for what they want to do. Now, the reason you're looking for industrial zoning, that's where data centers can go. That's where they can go in what's called by right mode. And if you're not the person who handles commercial, no shame if you didn't know that. That means they can buy the parcel and do it without a public vote, without a hearing, without anything else. Now, some communities are putting in overlay about data centers that no longer allow it by right. I don't know if your community has that, but you can find out. So that's on this list. And it also encourages us as realtors to build a community. Build a little tribe where you might be like Margie and put on your social media. I learned some things today about data centers. Absolutely, always learning to protect my clients. And you'll see people jump into your comments with their opinions. Well, they care about the community you're in. So you could also reach out to them and say, hey, I'd like to create a WhatsApp where we can discuss these things so that if we see one show up on the agenda for planning and zoning, we can make sure that 12 like-minded people are willing to come because at any of these moments, one person showing up might actually be able to get the board to change its mind. 12 people showing up, they're very likely to change their mind because our appointed and elected officials do not like pushback. They don't like confrontation. And so even showing up to say, I have a viewpoint without being yelly and without using ugly words, you just showed up physically, their viewpoint might change. That's how much power you have. And that's what the checklist is designed. It's just to get us into preparation mode so that for once in real estate, we could be more proactive and a little less reactive.
Yes, and I assume it's taken a lot of research and you have spent a lot of time looking into data centers and what's going on in your community as well, and getting an overview of what's happening nationally. So, can you share your experience going back to when you first started diving into data centers? And can you share any facts from the research you've done?
Well, the thing I have learned is that this is not a partisan topic. And so often when we talk about charged issues, they land in one side or the other. The data center conversation, I think, is more about do we have property rights or not? And that is a cross platform, cross party, common sense kind of conversation. If you look at what's happening in Georgia, Georgia Power is using eminent domain for their transmission lines to do whatever they want with data centers. They've chosen counties that don't have zoning that are very rural in nature. Well, there's realtors in all those places, and you notice that it's not an R versus a D thing. This is a wait a minute. Should we be letting Georgia Power do whatever they want? That's a common sense thing. And so if you're paying attention to these things, you'll start to see it come up. And we all know the algorithm on all of these platforms knows what you're talking about. So for anybody that's watching this or watched my webinar, you probably got a bunch of data center stuff in your Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter feeds. Well, that's just what happens because we're all being spied on all the time by our devices. All right, so what do you do with that? Well, if you see everything agreeing in one direction, you're experiencing what's called confirmation bias. You're being fed things to keep you in your silo. What you're looking for is the other side. When everything agrees, go over here, look for the other side. The thing that told me I was in a hot spot is that the minute I started speaking up against data centers, because I am not in favor of most data centers. That is my personal opinion. But as a realtor, I can absolutely see all sides. That's what we all have to be thinking about. This is all about paying attention and, again, being curious. What don't I know? Then I can do a little more digging. I can ask a few more questions and start doing some additional research. And that's what's led me where I am because I continually gather information. And if you're the person who says, Leigh Brown, where do I get good information? I think everything is biased. Well, you should know pretty much everything is biased. But I follow a lot of independent journalists on Substack. That is a resource many people aren't leaning into. There's a lot of writers in there who are sharing what they think, a lot of long forms. So I really enjoy the different viewpoints I find. And that just leads me to continue researching any hot topic that's going on, which is also why I'm very against the flock cameras. The deflock movement is something I feel strongly about. And I really think realtors are going to have to get loud in that space because that is a disclosure issue that really is not being spoken about very much right now. So pay attention, people, because if you're being told to believe something, you got to always ask, what's the other side look like?
That's definitely a very important topic that people are discussing, how technology is evolving. And of course, the big question is, what is it impacting? What is its influence? So how do you see data centers influencing residential real estate over the next 5 to 10 years? And do you think it's going to be one of those topics where real estate professionals wish they had paid attention sooner?
100%. But because realtors they have to be multitaskers. And if you have a transaction and it is sucking up your bandwidth and you have to deal with yelling people and your repair negotiations and everybody's crazy, you don't have time to look at anything else. So that's where people make the assumption that the trade association is going to do it for them. Trade association is not touching data centers with a 10-foot pole right now. Now, I think it is because there are members on both sides and it's a land use issue. So by nature, our trade association really can't take a side, kind of has to stay neutral. As much as I wish they would, they're not going to, and I totally understand why. And so for the members who don't have the bandwidth to do what the association isn't doing, but they have to make a living, they can't mess with it. So 5 years from now, they are going to say, I guess I should have said something, but it'll be too late at that point because this is a burgeoning issue. And there's already people in Northern Virginia and Loudoun and Fairfax County who wish they had said something, had known more about these, because that's been a huge concentration of these data centers. Same thing in New Jersey and in some other markets where it's had a very strong negative impact. People spoke up too late. And so that's why you have to pay attention before the bulldozers are moving. And so when you ask what the 5 and 10-year implications are, that's why realtors have to be on planning and zoning, because I'm not convinced that in any of these planning and zoning meetings that there's a conversation about the 5 and 10-year window. All they're looking at is the right now window, which is typical of local elected officials because they are part-time, they're not compensated, it's a side hustle. There's only so much bandwidth that they have. So I give them a lot of latitude and grace for that, and I get it. If you're getting a stipend of $5,000 a year, you're not going to put everything on the line for this. They're not asking. But as a child of the 80s, and now I look around our country and all I see are empty shopping malls or almost empty shopping malls. What are we going to do with all this square footage? What do you do with these giant parking lots? There's a whole what if going on. You have people that have stars in their eyes that say turn it into residential apartments. Can't necessarily do that with the mall because it's not the same layout. It certainly doesn't fit code and requirements. And so the upfit's crazy. And in the meantime, they sit there vacant and they attract vagrants and they attract trouble because they're empty. These data centers are building the servers for these things. And how much smaller is this phone now versus the phone that I grew up with? It's not even the same thing. The computer that was in Desk Sets, which is one of the best Christmas movies ever with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, where they had a brand new computer for the office and it was a whole room and a whole wall. And now our computer is this or even this. These things shrink. So I'll give an example. The data center being built about 2 miles from my house is 2.5 million square feet. It's going to house hundreds of thousands of servers. All right, that's today's server. Based on the Moore's Law, which talks about how the speed of our technology doubles frequently, what's that going to look like by the time they're finished with construction in 2 years? They likely won't need 2.5 million square feet. So part of it won't be occupied. And then you go 5 more years out, how much of it has been shrunk further? So now you have a giant facility. How many other uses are you going to have for this place? Maybe not many as things continue to get more globalized. As much as I don't like it, it's what happens. And we have more and more shrinkage. Things get faster and more efficient. All right, so now that acreage has been taken up by an almost empty 2.5 million square foot building. What's going to happen to it? And because it housed servers which have rare earth minerals in it, is that going to change the makeup of the soil? It can't go back to being ag or arable land because it's had these items on, just like our solar farms. It's been discovered already, and nobody wants to talk about this either. Wherever you've had solar panels, you can't return that land really to an arable status because of the leaching of the chemicals and the minerals into the soil. Plus, that ruined all the wildlife patterns. So we're going to see the same impact from these things, but different. So we have to pay attention right now. Ask better questions. And if you're going to get a data center, fight that it be closed loop, fight that it be smaller, fight that there's some kind of a plan to consolidate where it sits so that you're not dealing with an unusable parcel of land in the future because you cannot make more land. We all know this. And if you look at the history of brownfields, I think every residential realtor is aware of brownfields. Well, now you can build residential on them thanks to opportunity zones. But do you want to live on a brownfield? Some people do and some don't. Again, it's right back to where we started. It's a disclosure issue. It might have an impact. It might not. But because we don't know, we have to disclose and we have to ask more questions.
Yes, we're going to have to collect all that information and see in real time, as well as in the future, how this will impact real estate, as well as just impacting everyone in our communities. So, as we come to a close, is there anything you want to add as final thoughts?
Well, the biggest thing I'll just point out is that it is okay for you to have an opinion. It is okay for you to lean in one direction or the other, pro or against. That's okay. What's not okay is you digging in a stake in the ground and declaring that everybody else around you is completely wrong, because that alienates people at a time when we need to have conversations, simply because there is so much we don't know about the data centers and their impact, and because all of us are using data centers, whether we want to or not. So do your research, take a stance, but take your stance in such a way that you've left the door open for people who disagree with you to walk in and talk, and that you've left yourself an ability to walk out that door and change your mind, because that can happen too. And the best realtors all know we are not right 100% of the time. We've been wrong sometimes on price. Sometimes you thought a neighborhood would be great and it wound up being meh. And when you've had to tell somebody, man, I wish that had worked out differently, but here we are, your credibility goes up when you can acknowledge the fact that you're not perfect. This is the very same kind of conversation. But because it is a big deal and it matters so much to the long-term life of your community, you do have an obligation to do some homework and to be willing to figure out your stance and stand on it. And you can follow all this information on my Substack, of course, over, you go to substack.com, just look for Leigh Thomas Brown like you always do. My Substack is called Bricks and Grits. You can go look it up and read what my opinion is and where the research is and argue back with me. The comments are open. Share what your thoughts are, then write your own argument. We have to encourage a very vibrant conversation if we're going to figure out where this is going and if we're going to do what's best for our communities and for our neighbors.
Well, thanks so much for being here and sharing your experience and extensive knowledge with us and for having this important conversation. And for our listeners, can you tell us where anybody can find you if they want to get connected?
Of course, I'm on all the social platforms. You look for Leigh or Leigh Thomas Brown, you'll find me. You can also find me through the CRS.com referral page. So go look for me. I do serve Concord, North Carolina, and Greater Charlotte. and I'm always honored to help and answer questions. But I'll just leave you with this. When you find me, if you disagree with me, I absolutely welcome that. But if you type in all caps and you get ugly, I'm probably going to block you because I'm over people being aggressive and mean.
Everyone deserves a healthy, respectful debate and healthy boundaries on all sides, of course. We really appreciate, Leigh, you being here, and thank you to all of our listeners for making the time to join us today. We'll see you next time on the Real Estate Real Talk podcast.
Thanks for listening to Real Estate Real Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, crs.com/realtalk, to your friends and colleagues. Please leave us a positive review wherever you listen to our podcast, and be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous episodes. This has been a Residential Real Estate Council production. Join us next time for another edition of Real Estate Real Talk.